After giving birth, I bought my dream home to heal with my baby. The very first night, my mother called with a chilling demand. "We are moving in tomorrow. I do not do rules for my grandchild." She even added that my sister and her husband were coming too, and if I did not like it, I could leave. I did not argue. I just prepared. When they barged through my front door expecting me to cower, they completely froze at who was waiting inside. I am Paige, 34 years old, and a senior forensic financial auditor. For decades, I was the designated punching bag for my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build an iron wall against toxic family members. The heavy thud of a designer knockoff suitcase crashing against my Brazilian oak hardwood floors shattered the peace of my Saturday morning. Brenda, my 58-year-old mother, stormed into the grand entryway of my new Seattle suburb home, exactly as if her name was printed on the deed. Right behind her trailed my 30-year-old sister, Madison, the eternal golden child of the family, and her husband, Malik. Malik, a 32-year-old African-American man who constantly bragged about his crypto investments, wore a flashy tailored suit that screamed unearned wealth but reeked of desperate debt. Brenda aggressively threw her heavy, metal-studded handbag onto my pristine kitchen island. The hardware scraped sharply across the quartz surface. "Pack your bags right now, Paige," Brenda barked, not even glancing at the bassinet where my 2-month-old son Leo was resting. "Madison and Malik are taking the master suite for their pregnancy plans. You and Leo are moving down to the basement immediately. This house is under my management now, and I will not have my favorite daughter stressed out in a cramped apartment when you have all this space." I did not have time to process her sheer audacity before Madison lunged forward. Without washing her hands, without even taking off her coat from the airport, she reached directly into the bassinet, aiming straight to pick up my sleeping newborn. I moved with lightning speed. I slapped her wrist away so hard the sharp smack echoed all the way up to the vaulted ceiling. Madison immediately recoiled, clutching her hand against her chest as her face contorted into a practiced theatrical sob. Brenda rushed forward, placing herself between me and the golden child, her eyes narrowing into hateful, venomous slits. "You are always so impossibly selfish," Brenda sneered, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You have not changed one single bit. You are acting exactly like you did when you were 18 and working miserable night shifts. Remember when you threw a massive, ungrateful fit just because I emptied your college savings to pay for Madison's sorority dues? You have a massive house now. It is your absolute duty to carry your sister. She deserves the master suite and the luxury far more than a single mother does." I did not cry. I did not argue back. I did not try to reason with a woman who had spent my entire life gaslighting me into submission. The terrified, compliant teenage girl Brenda used to steamroll was completely dead. In her place stood a woman who spent her days hunting down ghost money and dismantling white-collar criminals for the federal government. I calmly picked up my espresso cup, took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark roast, and reached my free hand under the kitchen counter. I pressed the small hidden button linked directly to my smart home security system. The heavy frosted glass doors to my home office slid open smoothly. Brenda stopped mid-rant, her mouth hanging open. Madison abruptly dropped her fake crying routine. Malik took a sudden step backward, his eyes widening in alarm. Stepping out of the office was Donovan, a 55-year-old real estate and family law attorney with a well-earned reputation for being absolutely ruthless in the courtroom. Right behind him were two broad-shouldered armed sheriff deputies, their silver badges catching the morning light pouring through the bay windows. Donovan adjusted his tie, his face completely devoid of any warmth, and walked straight toward the kitchen island. He placed a crisp, legally binding document right next to Brenda's discarded purse. "This is a formal trespassing order," Donovan stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are entirely uninvited. You have no legal right to be on these premises, and you have exactly 2 minutes to remove yourselves and your luggage from my client's property before you are escorted out in handcuffs." Brenda's jaw went completely slack. The color drained from Madison's face as she hid behind her husband. But Malik suddenly smirked. The initial shock faded from his features, replaced by a deep, arrogant confidence. He puffed out his chest, stepping squarely in front of the deputies, and reached into the inner pocket of his flashy jacket. He pulled out a thick, heavily notarized document, aggressively slapping it down on the court's counter right on top of Donovan's paperwork. "You cannot trespass the legal tenants of this property," Page Malik said, his voice dripping with smug superiority. He tapped the paper with his index finger. "We have a signed residential lease right here granting us 5 years of rent-free tenancy. You might play auditor at your little corporate desk, but I do real business. Family takes care of family, and you are not kicking us out today or ever." Malik held the lease agreement up so the morning light caught the raised notary seal. It looked incredibly official. The thick paper, the blue ink, the crisp formatting. He had clearly gone through a lot of trouble to make it look like an airtight legal contract. Brenda stepped out from behind him, her chest puffed out with victory. She turned to the sheriff deputies, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "Arrest her right now!" Brenda demanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She filed a false police report to harass her own family. She is mentally unstable and trying to throw her pregnant sister out on the street. Do your jobs and put her in handcuffs." The taller of the two deputies frowned, stepping forward to take the document from Malik. He examined the paperwork closely. His eyes scanned the paragraphs before landing on the signature line. He looked up at me, his expression tight with protocol. "Ma'am, is this your signature on this residential lease agreement?" Before I could answer, Malik let out a loud, mocking laugh. He leaned against my kitchen island as if he had already won the war. "Of course it is her signature," Malik sneered. "Do you not remember signing this page? You were at the hospital. You were high on epidurals and painkillers after pushing out that kid. I brought the papers in hidden right underneath the hospital discharge forms. You thought you were signing medical release papers. But family takes care of family, right? I am just managing your assets, since you clearly cannot do it alone as a single mother. You always were too weak to handle real pressure. You need a man to take charge of this property." He looked me up and down with utter contempt. "You might play auditor at your little corporate desk, but I do real business. You are out of your league. We have a 5-year lease, rent-free." Madison chimed in from the hallway, nodding vigorously. "We are doing you a favor, Paige. You need us here to help you. You should be thanking Malik for taking charge." I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the fear they so desperately wanted to see. I simply smiled. It was a cold, icy smile that made Malik blink in confusion. I turned my attention to my attorney. "Donovan," I said quietly, "please explain real business to my brother-in-law." Donovan unclasped his leather briefcase with a sharp, satisfying snap. He reached inside and pulled out a much thicker document bound in a heavy blue cover. He did not hand it to Malik. He handed it directly to the sheriff. "That is the recorded property deed for this address," Donovan stated, his voice calm and lethal. "You will notice that my client Paige does not own this house. Her name does not appear anywhere on that deed." The sheriff scanned the first page of the deed. Malik's arrogant smirk began to falter. He stood up straight, craning his neck to see the paperwork in the deputy's hands. "What are you talking about?" Malik demanded, his voice pitching up. "I checked the public records. She bought this house last month." I stepped forward, looking Malik dead in the eyes. "I bought this house through an anonymous Delaware limited liability company." I explained, enunciating every single word so the reality would sink deep into his brain. "I am a forensic financial auditor. My entire career is built on tracking hidden assets, untangling corporate fraud, and protecting wealth from financial predators exactly like you. Did you really think I would put $1 million asset in my own name when I know my mother's history of identity theft? I do not own this property. A corporate entity owns this property. I am merely a designated manager for that LLC." Malik stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as the legal trap snapped shut around his ankles. Donovan stepped closer to the deputies. "As you can see, officers, an individual cannot lease a property owned by a corporate entity without a formal board resolution. That piece of paper Malik is holding is legally void. It means absolutely nothing." I kept my eyes locked on Malik, And since you just admitted in front of 2 law enforcement officers and an attorney that you fraudulently misrepresented the contents of a document to obtain my signature while I was under the influence of heavy narcotics, you did not just commit a simple forgery. You attempted to claim financial rights over $1 million asset using deceptive practices. That constitutes felony mortgage fraud. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. The reality of the situation crashed down on Malik. The flashy, untouchable persona he had worn since the moment he walked through my door completely evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal. The sheriff handed the deed back to Donovan. He turned to his partner and gave a sharp nod. He reached to his belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Sir," the sheriff said, his voice dropping an octave, "I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are being detained for uttering a forged document and attempted fraud." Malik stumbled backward, bumping into the court's counter. "Wait," he stammered, raising his hands defensively. "This is a misunderstanding. It is just a family dispute. We were just negotiating." "Turn around right now," the deputy commanded, stepping forward and grabbing Malik by the shoulder. Madison let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She rushed forward, grabbing the deputy's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his uniform. "You cannot arrest him. We are going to have a baby. He is a wealthy investor. You are ruining our lives. You cannot do this to us." "Paige, tell them to stop. Tell them it is a joke." The second deputy quickly intercepted Madison, physically moving her back. "Ma'am, step away, or you will be arrested for interfering with a police officer." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through my kitchen was the sweetest sound I had heard all year. Malik was pushed against the counter, his flashy tailored suit wrinkling awkwardly as his arms were restrained behind him. His eyes darted around the room, full of wild panic. Brenda stood frozen near the entryway. The absolute certainty she had walked in with was entirely gone. She watched her golden son-in-law being treated like a common criminal. She looked at Madison, who was sobbing uncontrollably against the wall. Then she looked at me. She saw the absolute lack of pity in my expression. She realized that the old tactics of guilt and manipulation were completely useless. The power dynamic had permanently shifted, and she could not handle it. Her shock rapidly morphed into a vicious, desperate rage. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out her smartphone. Her hands were shaking violently, but her eyes burned with pure malice. "Fine." Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You want to play legal games? You want to lock up family and hide behind your lawyers? We will see how tough you are when they take your precious child away." She furiously dialed a number on her phone and held it to her ear, glaring at me with a triumphant, evil sneer. "I am calling Child Protective Services right this second," Brenda yelled over Madison's crying. "I am going to tell them you are completely unhinged. I am going to say you are a danger to that infant. Let us see how you like losing your baby to the state." Brenda did not hesitate for a single second. She unlocked her phone and dialed the emergency child welfare hotline right in front of the deputies. Within seconds, her entire demeanor shifted. The vicious, screaming woman vanished entirely. In her place was a terrified, weeping grandmother pleading for the life of her grandchild. She put on a performance so terrifyingly convincing it could have won an award. "Please, you have to help us," Brenda cried into the phone, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. She faked a hyperventilation, clutching her chest. "My daughter Paige is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. She is completely unhinged. She is threatening us with a gun, and my newborn grandson has not eaten in days. She has him locked in the basement. Please hurry, I think she is going to hurt him." She hung up the phone and wiped a fake tear from her cheek. She looked at me with a triumphant, wicked glare. The dynamic in the room changed instantly. The taller deputy, who had a firm grip on Malik, cursed under his breath. He looked at his partner with sheer frustration. "We have a reported child endangerment situation," the deputy stated, his tone shifting to strict protocol. "We have to lock down the scene until a state social worker arrives. Nobody leaves this house." Malik let out a low, breathy laugh. He leaned back against the quartz island, testing the limits of his steel handcuffs. "Looks like I am staying right here, Malik said, flashing a gold-capped tooth. You really overplayed your hand, Paige. You are going to lose your kid and your house in the same day. Madison saw the deputies hesitate and immediately seized the opportunity to pile on the lies. She stepped out from behind her husband and put on her best concerned sister face, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. Officers, you have to believe. My mother Madison pleaded, pointing a shaking finger at me. Paige has a documented history of severe mental instability. She is obsessed with me and has always been dangerously jealous of my life. She was hospitalized for a complete psychological breakdown when she was 22. She had to be placed on a psychiatric watch because she was completely out of her mind. She is absolutely not fit to be a mother. I did not break eye contact with Madison. I shifted Leo's weight in my arms, keeping him perfectly shielded against my chest. He was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the monsters standing in his future kitchen. I was not placed on a psychiatric watch, Madison, I said, my voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. I collapsed from severe physical exhaustion. I ended up in the emergency room with a heart rate of 40 beats per minute because I was working 3 back-to-back graveyard shifts. I turned my gaze to Brenda, watching the fake tears dry up on her face as she realized what I was about to reveal. I was working those grueling shifts because someone had to pay off the $35,000 in credit card debt that my mother fraudulently opened using my social security number the week I turned 18. I explained directly to the deputies. She ruined my credit score to buy designer clothes and fund Madison's luxury spring break trips. I paid off every single cent of that stolen money by scrubbing floors and auditing spreadsheets just to keep her out of a federal prison. That is my documented history. The deputies exchanged a loaded look. Donovan, my attorney, stepped forward and nodded sharply. My client is telling the truth, Donovan said, his voice booming with legal authority. I have the financial ledgers and the original police reports from a decade ago that we ultimately declined to prosecute to keep the peace. But right now, my client is the victim of an active fraud attempt by the man currently wearing your handcuffs. The sheriff held up a hand, his jaw tight. I understand, counselor. But a priority child welfare call overrides everything else on this board. By state law, I cannot transport this suspect or clear this scene until Child Protective Services conducts a thorough wellness check on the infant. Our hands are completely tied until the state agent gives the all clear. Brenda smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that revealed her rotting core. She walked over to the kitchen sink, poured herself a glass of filtered water, and took a leisurely sip. She leaned in close to me, ensuring the deputies were distracted by Malik complaining about his wrists. You always were too smart for your own good, Paige, Brenda whispered, her voice dripping with venom. But you forgot who taught you how to play the game. They are going to take Leo away today. The state will place him in my custody as his loving, stable grandmother. Madison and Malik will raise him in the master bedroom of this gorgeous house while they try for their own baby, and you will be rotting in a psychiatric ward. You should have just let us move in quietly. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who was willing to destroy my life, strip away my child, and completely ruin my sanity just to secure a free luxury home for her golden daughter. I felt no anger anymore. I only felt a cold, surgical precision. You have 5 minutes left of freedom, Brenda, I stated evenly. I suggest you enjoy the water. The heavy oak front door shuddered under a series of loud, demanding knocks. Child Protective Services, a stern female voice called out from the entryway. One of the deputies moved to the door and let her inside. Agent Higgins stepped into the grand foyer. She wore a sharp blazer, her state identification badge clipped visibly to her lapel, and she carried a thick electronic tablet. She scanned the room with absolute authority, taking in the deputies, Malik in handcuffs, Brenda acting like a traumatized victim, and me holding Leo. I am Agent Higgins, she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. We received a priority 1 emergency call regarding an infant in severe distress, a mother suffering from postpartum psychosis, and unsecured firearms on the premises. Brenda immediately rushed toward Higgins, throwing her hands over her face in a display of pure theatrics. Thank God you are here. She is completely erratic. She is starving my grandson. please, you have to save him before she does something unthinkable. Agent Higgins bypassed Brenda entirely and marched straight toward me. She stopped 3 feet away, her eyes locked intensely on Leo. "Ma'am, I need you to hand the child over to me immediately," Higgins demanded. "I am placing him under temporary emergency state protection until a medical professional can evaluate his health and we can execute a search of this property for weapons." Malik grinned widely from the counter. Madison let out a heavy sigh of relief, leaning against her husband. Brenda crossed her arms, looking at me with total victory written across her face. They thought they had won. They thought the system was going to crush me and hand them the keys to my kingdom. I did not hand Leo over. I did not flinch. Instead, I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the small black remote for my home media system. I pointed it directly at the 75-inch smart television mounted above the living room fireplace. "Agent Higgins," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, unshakable authority. "Before you even think about touching my son, you need to watch this." I pressed the play button on the remote. The 75-inch screen mounted above the fireplace blinked to life in stunning 4K resolution. The video displayed my own front porch, time-stamped exactly 22 minutes ago. The ultra-high-definition cameras captured every single detail, right down to the nervous sweat beading on Malik's forehead as the three of them huddled closely outside my front door. The hidden microphone arrays built into my porch eaves are designed to pick up whispers from 50 feet away. The audio played back crystal clear through my surround sound speakers, filling the living room with the sound of my mother's treacherous voice. On the massive screen, Brenda reached into her designer knockoff bag. She pulled out a small, clear plastic baggie and shoved it directly into Madison's hands. "Listen to me very carefully," Brenda hissed on the recording. "While I distract Paige in the kitchen, you go straight down the hall to the nursery. Lift the mattress in the bassinet and slide this right underneath." Madison looked down at the baggie in absolute disgust. "Do I have to touch it?" Madison whined on screen. "It is a crack pipe, Mom. It is gross. What if my fingerprints get on it?" "Wipe it down with your sleeve, you idiot," Brenda snapped, rolling her eyes. "The moment you plant it, I will call Child Protective Services. They will find it, they will assume Paige is an unfit junkie, and they will take the baby immediately." Malik stepped into the camera frame, a greedy, predatory grin stretching across his face. He wrapped his arm around Madison, pulling her close. "Just do it," Maddie Malik said, his voice echoing loudly through my living room speakers. "Once the baby is gone, she will completely crack. She will end up institutionalized, just like she did during that nervous breakdown when she was 22. Once she is locked up in a psychiatric ward, I can forge a power of attorney, leverage her company, and pay off my crypto margin calls before the cartel guys come breaking my legs. We get the house, we get the cash, and she gets a padded cell." I paused the video. The frozen image on the television showed my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law actively conspiring to destroy my family, steal my child, and commit federal fraud. The silence in my living room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. I turned my gaze away from the television and looked directly at Agent Higgins. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself with devastating, irrefutable clarity. Agent Higgins lowered her electronic tablet. The stern, judgmental expression she had worn when she walked through my front door vanished entirely. In its place was a look of cold, professional fury. She turned slowly to face my mother. Brenda's face was drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed, struggling to form a coherent sentence as her grand evil master plan collapsed around her ankles. She took a step backward, bumping into the kitchen island. "I can explain," Brenda stammered, holding her hands up defensively. "That video is manipulated. It is a fake. Paige works with computers all day. She fabricated that audio to frame us. We just got here. We just wanted to visit our family." Agent Higgins did not even blink at the pathetic lie. Under modern state and federal law, filing a malicious false report to Child Protective Services in an attempt to facilitate financial fraud is a severe felony, Higgins stated, her voice sharp and uncompromising. You weaponized a state agency to try and steal a child for financial gain. You are not a concerned grandmother. You are a criminal. Higgins turned sharply toward the two sheriff deputies standing near the kitchen island. Deputies, she commanded, pointing a steady finger directly at Brenda. Place this woman under arrest for filing a false child endangerment report and attempted fraud. Brenda shrieked. A genuine panicked scream tore from her throat as the taller deputy stepped forward and grabbed her by the arm. He twisted her wrists behind her back, ignoring her frantic protests, as he secured a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. No, Brenda yelled, struggling wildly against the deputy's iron grip. You cannot do this. I am a respected woman in this community. Madison, do something. Tell them it is a lie. Madison was pressed flat against the wall, trembling violently, absolutely terrified that she would be placed in handcuffs next. She covered her face and began to sob, completely abandoning her mother. But it was Malik who realized the true gravity of the situation. He knew that the digital recording on my server was the only piece of hard evidence tying him to the extortion plot and his massive, dangerous financial debts. If he could destroy the hard drives, he believed he could still negotiate his way out of a federal prison sentence. Without warning, Malik let out a desperate, guttural roar. He lowered his shoulder and violently lunged across the living room, aiming straight for the custom-built media shelving unit tucked into the corner of the wall. The rack held my routers, my security drives, and my entire digital network. He fully intended to smash the entire server rack to pieces. "Stop right there," one of the deputies shouted, drawing his taser and charging across the room after him. Malik ignored the loud command. He threw his entire body weight against the heavy wooden shelving. The massive impact rattled the walls, knocking framed photographs and decorative vases to the floor with a series of sharp, violent crashes. But as Malik aggressively tackled the server rack, the sudden violent motion caused his tailored suit jacket to fly open. Something heavy, dark, and metallic dislodged from the waistband of his trousers. It slipped free and fell to the floor, hitting the Brazilian oak hardwood with a sickening, heavy thud that echoed louder than any scream in the room. Everyone froze instantly. The deputy stopped dead in his tracks, dropping his yellow taser and instantly reaching for his actual service weapon. Agent Higgins took a swift step backward, shielding herself behind the solid quartz of the kitchen island. I tightened my protective grip around Leo, pivoting my body away from the immediate threat. Lying perfectly still on the gleaming hardwood floor, just inches away from Malik's expensive leather shoes, was a black, unregistered handgun. Gun weapon on the floor. The taller deputy unholstered his service weapon in a fraction of a second, leveling the barrel directly at Malik's chest. The second deputy drew his firearm simultaneously, forming a lethal crossfire angle across my pristine kitchen. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to violently explosive in a single heartbeat. "Do not move a single muscle," the taller deputy bellowed, his voice vibrating with adrenaline. "Get your hands where I can see them, interlace your fingers behind your head and drop to your knees. Do it right now." Malik froze completely. The arrogant, swaggering man who had barged into my home demanding the master suite was entirely gone. He stared at the black steel barrel pointed at his chest, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. He slowly raised his trembling hands, interlaced his fingers behind his head, and sank heavily onto his knees. Agent Higgins flattened herself against the kitchen island, pulling her tablet tightly to her chest. I stepped further back into the hallway, shielding Leo completely with my body, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. "Do not shoot him!" Madison shrieked, her voice tearing through the room like a siren. She lunged forward, but the second deputy instantly threw his left arm out, physically blocking her path. "Stay exactly where you are, ma'am," the deputy warned, keeping his weapon fixed on Malik. "If you take one more step, I will place you under arrest for obstruction." Madison collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically. But even in the face of loaded weapons and her husband kneeling on the floor like a common criminal, Madison could not abandon her lifelong habit of making herself the victim and blaming me for her terrible choices. She turned her tear-streaked face toward me, her expression twisting with absolute venom. "This is all your fault, Paige!" Madison screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "We needed that gun for protection because of you." You cut us off. Malik had to borrow money from incredibly dangerous people because you selfishly refused to give us your corporate bonus last year. We needed that money to secure his crypto investments, and you kept it all for yourself. You forced him to go to loan sharks. People have been threatening us, and you did not even care. You made him carry that gun. I looked down at my sister, feeling a profound sense of disgust. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was staggering. You asked me for my entire six-figure corporate bonus to fund a fraudulent crypto scheme. I said, my voice eerily calm, despite the drawn weapons in my living room. When I said no, you threw a tantrum and stopped speaking to me. I did not force your husband to take out illegal loans, Madison. I did not force him to borrow money from the cartel. And I certainly did not force him to bring a concealed, unregistered firearm into the home of a newborn baby. The taller deputy stepped forward cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on Malik. He kicked the handgun out of Malik's reach, sliding it across the polished hardwood until it hit the baseboards. The second deputy quickly holstered his weapon, grabbed Malik by the arms, and forced him face down onto the floor. He reapplied the heavy steel handcuffs, securing them so tightly that Malik let out a sharp gasp of pain. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, the taller deputy said, speaking into the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. "Suspect is detained. I need a rush trace on a recovered firearm." The deputy read off the serial number stamped into the metal frame of the handgun. He placed the weapon into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it tightly. "You have no idea what you just did." Malik grunted from the floor, his cheek pressed flat against the wood. "It is just a minor weapons charge. I will be out on bail by midnight, and you are going to regret this, Paige." I looked down at him and let out a short, hollow laugh. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my espresso cup, and took a slow sip. The coffee was cold, but it tasted like absolute victory. "You really do not pay attention, Malik," I stated, looking down at him with forensic precision. "I am a senior financial auditor. My entire life revolves around background checks, risk assessments, and uncovering things people desperately want to keep hidden. Did you honestly think I would let my sister marry a man who claimed to be a wealthy investor without running a comprehensive background check on him first?" Malik stopped struggling. He went completely still on the floor. Madison stopped her hysterical sobbing, looking up at me with sudden confusion. "I ran your name through every federal and state database 3 years ago." I continued, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. "I know exactly who you are. I know about the massive wire fraud conviction in Illinois. I know you served 3 years in a federal penitentiary, and I know you are currently out on strict parole." Donovan, my attorney, adjusted his glasses and nodded. He turned to the deputies, spelling out the legal reality of the situation. "Officers," Donovan said smoothly, "as a convicted felon on active parole, it is a severe federal crime for this man to possess a firearm of any kind. Add the fact that he was carrying a concealed weapon during the commission of a felony fraud attempt, and he is no longer looking at a minor weapons charge. He is looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal prison. He will not be seeing the outside of a cell for the next decade." Malik let out a strangled, panicked sound. Madison buried her face in her hands, realizing her luxurious lifestyle was officially over. Her wealthy investor husband was nothing but a broke, desperate criminal heading straight back to prison. But the real twist of the knife had not even happened yet. The deputy's shoulder radio crackled to life with a burst of static. The dispatcher's voice filtered through the small speaker, crisp and entirely unbothered by the chaos in my living room. "Unit 4, the dispatcher said. "We have a hit on that serial number. The firearm is highly restricted. It was reported stolen 3 weeks ago." The deputy pressed the button on his shoulder. "Copy that, dispatch. Where was the weapon reported stolen from?" The dispatcher's next words hit the room like a physical shockwave. "The weapon is registered to Apex Guardian Security," the dispatcher confirmed. "It was reported stolen directly from their corporate headquarters armory." The blood drained completely from Brenda's face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to lean heavily against the quartz island just to remain standing. I stared at my mother, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with terrifying clarity. Apex Guardian Security was not just a random corporate entity. It was the exact private security firm where Brenda currently worked as a front desk secretary. The taller deputy slowly turned his head away from the radio on his shoulder and locked his eyes directly onto Brenda. The entire atmosphere in the room crystallized into razor-sharp tension. "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice completely devoid of any previous patience. "What is the exact name of your current employer?" Brenda swallowed hard. The thick layers of expensive foundation and perfectly applied contouring on her face could not hide the sheer panic radiating from her pores. She gripped the edge of the quartz kitchen island so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I work for Apex Guardian Security," Brenda whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. "But I am just a receptionist. I sit at a desk, I answer the phones. I do not have anything to do with the armory." The deputy took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "A firearm registered to your specific place of employment was just recovered from the waistband of your son-in-law, who happens to be a convicted felon on active parole. And you expect me to believe that is a coincidence?" Brenda did not hesitate. The maternal loyalty she constantly preached about, the deep family devotion she used as a weapon to control me my entire life, evaporated in less than a second. Faced with the reality of a federal weapons charge, she immediately threw her golden child's husband to the wolves. "He stole it!" Brenda shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger at Malik, who was still pinned face down on the hardwood floor. "He is a thug. I always knew he was a violent criminal. He must have stolen my security access badge out of my purse when I was visiting their apartment. He duplicated my keys. I had absolutely nothing to do with this. You have to arrest him." On the floor, Malik stopped struggling against the steel handcuffs. The color rushed into his face, turning his skin a deep, furious shade of red. The polished, arrogant facade of the wealthy crypto investor completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, cornered man who realized he had just been handed a one-way ticket back to federal prison. "You lying, manipulative snake!" Malik roared, his voice tearing through the living room with explosive force. He thrashed against the deputy, holding him down, twisting his neck to glare up at Brenda with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You gave me the keys!" Brenda gasped in theatrical horror, clutching her chest. "Do not listen to him. He is a convicted liar." "You handed me the master access card," Malik yelled, ignoring the deputy pressing a knee into his shoulder to keep him pinned. "You gave me the vault code so I could sneak in after hours and rob the petty cash safe. Do not stand there and act like a victim. You planned the entire thing." Agent Higgins, the Child Protective Services investigator, stood frozen near the entryway. Her digital tablet hung loosely at her side as she watched a supposedly respectable suburban grandmother be implicated in a corporate burglary. "Why would she give you the keys to rob her own employer?" the sheriff demanded, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. "Because her precious, perfect daughter is completely broke," Malik spat out, aiming a vicious glare at Madison. "She plays the wealthy housewife at the country club, but we are drowning in debt. She maxed out 6 different credit cards just to pay for her luxury IVF treatments because she demanded to have a baby this year to keep up appearances. The loan sharks I went to wanted their money back with 30% interest. They threatened to break my legs." Malik let out a harsh, breathless laugh, shaking his head against the floorboards. Brenda panicked when the cartel guys started driving past our apartment. Malik continued spilling every single family secret in front of law enforcement. She could not stand the thought of her golden child being exposed as a fraud. So she gave me the access codes to the security firm. She told me exactly which blind spots the cameras did not cover. We needed that cash to pay off the margin calls and the medical debt. And I took the gun from the armory because I needed protection from the people we owed money to. Madison let out a high-pitched wail, dropping to her knees and covering her ears as her perfect, curated life was broadcasted as a complete criminal fabrication. "Shut up, Malik," Madison screamed. "Shut your mouth right now." I did not say a word. I simply stepped back into the archway of the living room, cradling Leo securely against my chest. I gently rocked my sleeping son, feeling the rhythmic, calming beat of his tiny heart against mine. I leaned against the doorframe and watched the spectacle unfold. For 34 years, this family had demanded my absolute obedience. They had drained my bank accounts, mocked my career, belittled my boundaries, and tried to strip away my sanity. Now, I did not have to lift a single finger. I just stood back and watched the Golden family tear itself apart like rabid wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Brenda lunged forward, her manicured hands curling into claws as she tried to reach Malik. "You ungrateful parasite!" Brenda screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "I tried to save you. I tried to give you $1 million house today, and you ruin everything." The taller deputy immediately intercepted Brenda, grabbing her by the shoulders and forcefully shoving her back against the kitchen island. "Ma'am, keep your hands to yourself or you will be restrained." The deputy barked, his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. The living room devolved into pure chaos. Brenda was sobbing and screaming about her ruined reputation. Malik was shouting a continuous stream of profanities from the floor, detailing exactly how much debt Madison had hidden from the family. Agent Higgins was furiously typing notes into her tablet, documenting every single felony admission spilling from their mouths. Amidst the deafening noise, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Madison had stopped crying. She had quietly pushed herself up from the floor, keeping her back pressed flat against the wall. While the deputies were entirely focused on restraining her husband and controlling her mother, Madison began inching backward. Her eyes were darting frantically toward the heavy frosted glass doors that led out to my back patio. She was trying to slip out the back exit and abandon her family to the police. I handed Leo to Donovan, my attorney, who took the baby with a reassuring nod. I stepped silently across the Brazilian oak floor, moving with the quiet precision of an auditor closing a ledger. Just as Madison's hand reached out to grasp the brass handle of the patio door, I stepped directly into her path. I crossed my arms, blocking her only avenue of escape. Madison froze, her hand hovering in the air. The color drained from her face as she looked into my eyes. "Going somewhere, Maddie?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You cannot leave the party yet. We have not even talked about the offshore accounts." I walked over to the kitchen island and pulled a thick, heavy red folder out of my leather work tote. The sound of the cardboard hitting the quartz countertop rang out like a gavel striking a sound block. "For years, this family loved to mock my career," I said, opening the folder. "You called me a boring bean counter. Brenda loved telling her country club friends that I just played with spreadsheets all day while you were busy being a glamorous socialite." I spread a massive stack of highlighted banking records, wire transfer receipts, and notarized loan applications across the island. "I don't just play with numbers, Madison," I stated, locking eyes with my terrified sister. "I am a senior forensic auditor. I hunt down ghost money for the federal government. I track offshore shell companies, I dismantle laundering operations, and I find every single penny that desperate criminals try to hide. Did you honestly believe you could run a sloppy financial scam in my own home without me noticing?" Madison approached the island, cautiously trembling from head to toe. She looked down at the documents, her face turning an ashen shade of gray. "Look closely," I commanded. "Malik didn't just lose your savings in bad investments. He took out 3-second mortgages under your identity using forged collateral." Brenda suddenly stopped, screaming at the deputy. She jerked her head toward the island, her eyes zooming in on the bank logos printed at the top of the statements. I picked up the final stack of papers and held them up so my mother could see them clearly. "He also completely drained your 401k retirement fund, Brenda," I said, delivering the fatal blow. "Every single dollar you saved over the last 30 years. Gone. Transferred into untraceable offshore accounts last month. You are utterly, entirely bankrupt." Brenda let out a hollow, breathless wheeze. She sagged against the deputy's grip. "No," Brenda gasped. "That is impossible. The bank requires authorization for early withdrawal. Malik could not have done that alone." "You are absolutely right," I said, sliding the withdrawal authorization forms directly under the bright pendant lights. "Malik could not have authorized the wire transfers by himself. He needed someone with matching familial identity verification to bypass the fraud protocols." I pointed my index finger directly at the signature line on the primary withdrawal document. Brenda strained forward to read the ink on the page. It was not Malik's messy scrawl. It was a looping, elegant, perfectly legible signature. Madison had signed them. Brenda slowly lifted her head, her face contorting into a mask of pure horror as she looked at her golden, perfect daughter. Madison shrank back against the cabinetry, shaking her head frantically. "Mom, I had to..." Madison cried out, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. We were drowning. You do not understand what it has been like. Brenda lunged forward with a guttural scream, her hands curled into fists. The taller deputy instantly grabbed Brenda by the shoulders, restraining her before she could physically attack her own daughter. Brenda thrashed against the officer's grip, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly around her face, her expensive makeup streaked with tears of absolute rage. I gave you everything! Brenda shrieked, the veins bulging in her neck. I sacrificed my entire life to make sure you had the best of the best. I favored you. I protected you. And you bankrupt me for a worthless, lying criminal. Madison's fear suddenly evaporated, replaced by the exact same toxic entitlement that Brenda had instilled in her since childhood. Instead of apologizing, Madison went on the offensive. You did this to me? Madison screamed back, pointing an accusatory finger right at our mother's face. You put so much pressure on me to be a wealthy trophy wife. From the day I met Malik, you cared about nothing but his bank account. You wanted a rich son-in-law so badly that you never stopped to question if any of it was real. Brenda stopped struggling against the deputy, her face dropping in genuine shock as Madison weaponized her own vanity against her. Malik was broke 2 years ago. Madison continued, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. But you would not stop bragging to your country club friends about our fake wealth. You told everyone we were buying a yacht. You told everyone Malik was a crypto genius. You set a standard of perfection that was absolutely impossible to maintain. I had to steal your money to keep up the lie. If I admitted we were broke, you would have looked like a fool, and you would have cut me off, just like you did to Paige. The silence that followed was deafening. The Golden family dynamic was finally exposed for exactly what it was, a house of cards built on delusion, greed, and superficial appearances. Brenda looked at Madison as if she was staring at a complete stranger. That is a fascinating story, Maddie, I said, keeping my tone crisp and professional. The pressure of high society, the burden of being the favorite daughter. It would make a great tragic memoir. There is just one massive problem with your timeline. Madison glared at me, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. What are you talking about? I picked up a specific stack of highlighted wire transfers and slid them across the island until they rested directly in front of her. As a forensic auditor, I do not care about your feelings or your country club status, I stated coldly. I care about routing numbers, I care about offshore tax havens, and I care about the physical destination of stolen funds. You claim you drained Brenda's retirement to pay for your luxury IVF treatments and to keep up your fake wealthy lifestyle. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top document. Not a single cent of that stolen money went to a fertility clinic, I revealed. And it certainly did not go into a crypto investment portfolio. Madison frowned, leaning over the counter to look at the routing numbers. Her confusion was genuine. I watched the gears slowly turn in her head as she tried to decipher the financial codes I had spent the last 3 days tracking. If it did not go to the investments, where did it go? Madison asked, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. I looked over at Malik. He was still sitting on the hardwood floor with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The arrogant smirk had returned to his face. He was not looking at Madison. He was staring directly at the floorboards, refusing to meet his wife's eyes. Your husband did not invest Brenda's life savings, I said, delivering the final devastating blow. He spent all of it on a luxury beachfront condo in Miami, a condo that is currently occupied by a 24-year-old cocktail waitress named Chloe. Madison physically recoiled as if she had been struck by lightning. You didn't buy a lifestyle, Maddie, I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet room. You committed federal wire fraud, you destroyed your mother's entire future, and you ruined your own life just so your husband could play sugar daddy to his mistress in Florida. Madison let out a sound that I had never heard before. It was a hollow, agonizing gasp of pure heartbreak. She slowly turned her head to look at Malik. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. Malik, Madison whispered, her voice completely broken. Tell me she is lying. Tell me she fabricated those papers. Malik did not say a word. He just let out a dark, cruel chuckle. Madison lunged at him. She threw herself across the kitchen, aiming her fingernails directly at his face. The second deputy immediately caught her around the waist, dragging her backward as she kicked and screamed like a feral animal. She hurled every insult imaginable at her husband, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her ultimate humiliation set in. Brenda simply slid down the side of the kitchen island, collapsing onto the floor. The proud, manipulative matriarch was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a woman who had just realized she was entirely destitute, betrayed by the only two people she had ever truly loved. I watched them fall apart, feeling no pity, no sadness, and absolutely no remorse. They had dug their own graves. I just provided the shovels. But the show was not completely over. Malik shifted his weight on the floor, ignoring his hysterical wife fighting the deputy behind him. He lifted his chin and locked his dark, predatory eyes directly onto mine. The smirk on his face widened, twisting into an expression of pure, calculated malice. "You think you're so smart, Paige?" Malik sneered, his voice cutting through Madison's screaming. "You think you have this all figured out with your little spreadsheets and your forensic audits? You think you won." I crossed my arms, looking down at him with utter indifference. "You are going to federal prison for a very long time, Malik. I would say that qualifies as a win." Malik laughed loudly, shaking his head. "I transferred the last $100,000 of your precious dead father's life insurance into an untraceable crypto wallet yesterday." Malik gloated, flashing a wicked, triumphant grin. "You're broke too, Paige." Malik shifted his shoulders against the polished Brazilian oak, testing the heavy steel handcuffs digging into his wrists. He craned his neck upward, his dark eyes gleaming with arrogant, misplaced confidence. Even pinned to the floor at gunpoint, he still believed he held the winning hand. "We can make a deal," Paige Malik stated, his voice dropping into a smooth, calculated negotiator's cadence. "You tell these deputies that this was all a big family misunderstanding. You drop the charges right now, and I will give you the seed phrase to the crypto wallet. You get your dead father's money back, and I walk out that front door. It is a simple transaction." He grinned, exposing his teeth, fully expecting me to crumble at the thought of losing my inheritance. Before I could even respond, Brenda let out a theatrical, piercing wail. She pushed herself up off the floor, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Harold's life insurance," Brenda gasped, her voice trembling with manufactured dramatic sorrow. "How could you, Malik? That money was sacred. That was all my poor dear Harold left behind to protect his family and honor his memory. How could you steal from a dead man?" She covered her face with her hands, forcing out loud, heavy sobs that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The sheer audacity of her performance was absolutely staggering. I set my espresso cup down on the quartz island with a sharp, resonant clack. "Stop performing, Brenda," I commanded, my voice slicing through her fake tears like a scalpel. "You do not care about my father's memory, and you certainly do not care about his life insurance." Brenda lowered her hands, her eyes flashing with sudden defensive anger. "You literally tried to sue me for that exact policy 24 hours after we put him in the ground," I stated, exposing her hypocrisy to everyone in the room. "I was still sitting in the funeral home picking out his headstone, and you dragged me into probate court. You demanded a massive payout from a man you divorced 10 years ago. Do not stand in my kitchen and act like a grieving widow when we both know you just wanted another shopping spree at Neiman Marcus." Brenda snapped her mouth shut, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. The taller deputy shot her a look of pure disgust before turning his attention back to the man on the floor. Malik was still grinning, waiting for my answer. He honestly believed he had backed me into a financial corner. He thought the threat of losing $100,000 would force me to let a dangerous armed felon walk free. I looked down at him, and then I laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or a panicked laugh. It was a genuine, relaxed sound of absolute amusement. I walked casually over to the kitchen island, pulled my laptop from my leather work tote, and flipped the screen open. I tapped my password into the keyboard, brought up my primary diagnostic software, and physically swung the laptop around, tilting the glowing screen downward so Malik could see it clearly from his spot on the floor. "There is no such thing as untraceable to a forensic auditor, Malik," I said, my tone deadly serious. Malik's arrogant smirk faltered slightly. He blinked, staring at the complex lines of code scrolling rapidly across my screen. Did you really think I kept 100 grand of liquid cash sitting in a vulnerable, unsecured checking account? I asked, looking at him with genuine pity. After I ran your background check 3 years ago and saw your federal wire fraud conviction, I knew exactly what you would try to do. You are a predator, but you are a highly predictable one. Madison stood frozen against the wall, her tear-streaked face pale as she listened to the trap I had laid for her husband. That was a decoy account, I revealed, pointing at the screen. A digital honeypot. I deliberately left a printed bank statement with the routing numbers sitting right on my home office desk, knowing Madison would snoop through my things and copy the information for you. Malik stopped breathing. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. The money you transferred yesterday was not my father's life insurance. I continued, dropping the final crushing weight of reality onto his shoulders. It was highly monitored bait, and the cryptocurrency wallet you moved it into, I coded an encrypted tracking beacon directly into the transfer protocol. I tapped the enter key. A massive digital map expanded across the laptop screen, covered in bright red lines, connecting hundreds of flashing nodes across the globe. You didn't hide anything, Malik. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You just opened a direct, unencrypted backdoor into your entire illicit network. The blockchain ledger is public, but you layered it through offshore shell exchanges to hide from the cartel. My tracker bypassed your shells entirely. It mapped every single hidden asset you have, every offshore account, every cartel payout, every piece of stolen money you funneled for your highly dangerous friends. Malik let out a strangled, terrified gasp. He thrashed against the floorboards, trying to turn away from the screen as if looking at it would seal his fate. He realized instantly that he had not just ruined his own life, he had just burned his incredibly violent criminal associates. He had handed their entire financial network to the authorities on a silver platter. You thought you were robbing a grieving daughter, I said, stepping back from the island and folding my arms. Instead, you just gave the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division a perfectly packaged, meticulously mapped roadmap of a multi-million-dollar money laundering syndicate. The absolute silence in my living room was suddenly shattered. It was not the sound of Malik crying or Brenda screaming or Madison begging for forgiveness. It was the wail of sirens. But these were not local police sirens. They were deep, heavy, aggressive bursts of sound echoing through the neighborhood. I looked through the massive front windows of my living room. The heavy crunch of gravel echoed loudly as a fleet of vehicles tore up my long, private driveway. They were not marked sheriff cruisers. They were massive, black, heavily armored utility vehicles. The federal government had arrived. The heavy, rhythmic thud of car doors slamming shut echoed through the front yard, vibrating against the reinforced glass of my living room windows. Heavy boot steps hammered against the wooden planks of the front porch. The front door swung open with forceful authority, completely bypassing any polite knock. 3 figures stepped into my foyer. They were not local police. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with bold yellow letters printed across their chests and backs. FBI. The taller local deputy instantly took his hand off his radio. He and his partner stepped back, their defensive postures melting into deferential nods. The hierarchy in the room shifted in a fraction of a second. The lead federal agent, a sharp-featured woman with a tight bun and a gaze that could cut glass, held up her badge. She addressed the local deputies in a crisp, no-nonsense tone, formally informing them that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was officially taking primary jurisdiction over the suspect on the floor. Malik stared up at the yellow letters on the agent's jacket. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the monumental shift in his reality. The lead agent did not even look down at him yet. Instead, she stepped over his legs, walked past Brenda's shivering form, and completely ignored Madison crying against the wall. She walked straight across the living room and extended her right hand. Donovan stepped forward, shifting his briefcase to his other hand, and met her grip with a firm, practiced handshake. "Excellent work, Donovan," the agent said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. She turned her sharp gaze to me and offered a tight, respectful nod. "And brilliant execution on the digital honeypot page. The routing numbers you fed him gave our cyber division the exact entry point we needed to bypass their encryption walls. Madison let out a confused, choked gasp, looking back and forth between me and the federal agent. You did not honestly think I was just sitting around waiting for this family to implode, did you? I asked, looking directly at my sister. Donovan and I have been working quietly with the federal task force for the last 6 months. We have been building a comprehensive wire fraud and racketeering case against your husband since the moment he first tried to muscle his way into my father's estate. I gestured toward the red folder still sitting on my kitchen island. Every single harassing phone call Malik made to my office. I stated, breaking down the trap step by step. Every forged document he submitted to the probate court, every thinly veiled threat he delivered trying to extort my family inheritance. Donovan and I logged all of it. We mapped his shell companies, we traced his money laundering operations through Miami, and we handed every single piece of evidence directly to the feds. The $100,000 transfer he initiated today was just the final undeniable nail in his coffin. He committed a federal cybercrime on a monitored network. On the floor, the absolute finality of the situation crashed down on Malik. The illusion of his glamorous life evaporated into thin air. He was not a wealthy crypto genius. He was not a high-rolling investor. He was a cornered, broke criminal who had just handed the federal government a direct map to a violent cartel's banking network. The federal agents hauled Malik to his feet roughly. They yanked his arms backward, ignoring his grunts of pain, and swapped the local police restraints for heavy federal handcuffs. Malik looked around the room wildly. His flashy designer suit was wrinkled and covered in dust from my floorboards. The leased supercars, the rented Miami condo, the fake luxury watches, the entire fraudulent empire he had built was completely gone, subject to immediate federal asset forfeiture. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole, and he knew the cartel would be waiting for him. As the agents began dragging him toward the front door, Malik stopped fighting the officers and instead turned his venom entirely on his wife. "You are absolutely useless," Malik roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred as he glared at Madison. "You dragged me into this mess. You begged me for money to keep up your pathetic country club image. You are a shallow, worthless liability, and you ruined my life." Madison covered her face with her hands, sobbing hysterically, as her husband screamed at her. Malik continued to hurl vicious, degrading insults at her, his voice growing louder and more frantic, until the federal agents finally shoved him out the front door and pushed him into the back of a waiting black SUV. The heavy front door clicked shut. The red and blue lights flashing against the living room windows slowly faded as the convoy of vehicles rolled down the driveway and disappeared onto the main road. A profound, heavy silence blanketed the living room. The local deputies quietly excused themselves, stepping out to the porch to finish their incident reports, leaving just my family, my attorney, and my sleeping son inside the house. Madison remained slumped against the kitchen cabinetry, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her marriage was over. Her wealth was a lie. Her future was entirely destroyed. I looked down at Brenda. My mother was still sitting on the floor where she had collapsed. Her retirement was gone. Her golden child was a fraud. Her social standing was permanently obliterated. I expected her to finally break down, to apologize, or to at least show a shred of genuine human remorse for the absolute destruction she had caused. Instead, Brenda placed her hands flat against the quartz counter and slowly pushed herself up to a standing position. She smoothed down the front of her wrinkled silk blouse. She reached up and adjusted her hair, tucking a stray blonde strand behind her ear. She brushed invisible dust off her designer skirt. She straightened her spine, took a deep breath, and forced a bright, sickeningly sweet smile onto her face. The sheer narcissism required to pivot so drastically in the face of total devastation was genuinely terrifying. Brenda looked at me, then looked at Madison and clapped her hands together lightly. "Well, good riddance," Brenda announced cheerfully, acting as if the last hour of federal arrests and financial ruin had never happened. "He was an absolute monster anyway. I never liked him. But now it is just us girls. Madison Page let us sit down right now and plan exactly how we are going to live here together." I stared at my mother, completely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. The silence in my living room stretched out heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Madison's muffled weeping against the kitchen cabinets. Donovan stood perfectly still beside me, his professional composure masking what I knew must be absolute astonishment. Brenda did not wait for an invitation. She immediately walked past me, gesturing wildly with her hands as she began assessing the layout of my home. Madison can take this primary guest suite with the attached bathroom, Brenda declared, her heels clicking against the Brazilian oak floors. She needs the extra sunlight to help her recover from the trauma Malik put her through. I will take the room at the end of the hall. We will need to move your home office into the basement page. It is the only practical solution since we will be bringing whatever furniture the federal agents do not confiscate. She turned back to face me, clasping her hands together in a twisted display of maternal solidarity. She genuinely believed that because Malik had been hauled away in federal handcuffs, the slate was magically wiped clean. In her twisted mind, the shared enemy erased the fact that she and my sister had just attempted to bankrupt me and ruin my life. "You are not moving into my house, Brenda," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Brenda's forced smile faltered, but she quickly glued it back into place. She let out a high, breathy laugh, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "Oh, Paige, do not hold on to grudges at a time like this," Brenda chided, stepping closer to me. "We have all been through a terrible ordeal today. That monster manipulated all of us, but we are family. Family sticks together when things get tough. We have nowhere else to go. We are completely destitute. You cannot possibly expect your own mother and sister to sleep on the street." I looked directly into her eyes, seeing the exact same manipulative spark that had governed my entire childhood. I took one deliberate step forward, forcing her to hold her ground. "Family sticks together when things get tough," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "That is a fascinating philosophy, Brenda. Tell me, did that rule apply when I was 15 years old?" Brenda blinked, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" "It was the middle of January," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. "I had double pneumonia. My fever was so high I could barely stand up, and I was coughing up blood in the bathroom sink. I crawled out into the hallway and begged you to take me to the emergency room." Brenda shifted her weight, breaking eye contact for a fraction of a second. She knew exactly what memory I was pulling from the dark archives of our family history. "You were wearing an emerald green silk gown," I continued, closing the distance between us until I could smell the expensive, cloying perfume she still wore. "You had a country club gala to attend with your wealthy friends. You looked down at me shivering on the floor and you told me to stop ruining your evening." "I was stressed," Brenda stammered, stepping backward. "You are taking a single moment out of context." "I remember your exact words," I said, leaning in close. "You looked at me and said, 'You are a burden. Do not expect me to sacrifice my life for your weakness.'" I paused, letting the silence amplify the weight of her own cruelty. "You are a burden, Brenda," I stated, throwing her exact words right back into her face. "Do not expect me to sacrifice my life for your weakness." Brenda's jaw dropped. The carefully constructed mask of the resilient matriarch completely shattered. Her face contorted with a mixture of profound shock and rising fury. She opened her mouth to shout, to launch into another tirade about her sacrifices and my ungratefulness, but I did not give her the chance. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. Donovan stepped forward. He popped the brass clasps of his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, heavy legal packet, and thrust it directly into Brenda's chest. She reflexively caught it, clutching the documents against her silk blouse. "What is this?" Brenda demanded, her voice shaking. "That is an itemized invoice and a formal notice of impending legal action," Donovan explained, his tone carrying the cold, hard authority of a seasoned litigator. "The total comes to exactly $65,000. Brenda let out a sharp gasp, ripping the packet open and staring at the top page. "65,000 for what?" "It is a comprehensive breakdown," I answered, stepping back to stand beside my attorney. "It includes the billable hours for Donovan's services over the last 6 months, alongside a civil claim for emotional distress and harassment. But the most important section is the final $30,000. Brenda frantically flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the bold legal print. Her hands began to shake so violently the papers rattled. 10 years ago, you opened a high-limit credit card using my social security number, I said, watching the blood drain completely from her face. You used it to fund a luxury vacation to Europe with your friends. When I found out, you cried and manipulated me. You said you would pay it back, and you begged me not to report it because it would ruin your social standing. I paid off that debt myself because I was young and terrified of destroying our family. Madison, still slumped against the kitchen cabinets, looked up at our mother in horror. Even the golden child had not known the depths of Brenda's financial depravity. I kept every single piece of paper from that fraud, Brenda, I continued. Every forged signature, every unauthorized transaction, every bank statement. While I was running the forensic audit on Malik, I went ahead and compiled your file as well. I officially submitted the entire packet to the district attorney for criminal prosecution yesterday morning. Brenda dropped the legal packet. The heavy pages scattered across the hardwood floor, landing around her designer shoes. She stumbled backward, bumping into the quartz island, completely unable to process the absolute finality of her destruction. She had no money, no home, and now she was facing her own criminal charges. Seeing her mother completely neutralized, Madison realized she had lost her only remaining shield. The protective bubble she had lived in her entire life had just popped. She had no husband to fund her lifestyle, no mother to fight her battles, and nowhere left to run. Madison pushed herself away from the cabinets. She took 2 steps toward me before suddenly doubling over. She let out a sharp, dramatic cry of pain, clutching her stomach with both hands. "Paige," Madison whimpered, sinking to her knees right in the middle of the kitchen. "Paige, my stomach. The stress, it is causing a medical emergency. I cannot breathe. I think something is wrong." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. She was playing the ultimate victim card using the oldest trick in the toxic family playbook. "Please," Madison begged, grasping at the hem of my pants. "I am sick. I cannot go out on the street like this. Just let me stay in the guest room, just for tonight. Please, Paige, you cannot throw your sick sister out into the cold." Madison collapsed fully onto the hardwood floor, curling her body into a tight, trembling ball. She clutched her stomach, her manicured nails digging into her expensive silk blouse. She let out a series of ragged, high-pitched gasps, squeezing her eyes shut, as if she were in the grip of blinding, unimaginable agony. "I cannot breathe," Madison wheezed, her chest heaving dramatically. "My chest is tight. Everything is going dark. Paige, please, you are killing me." Brenda, who had been staring blankly at the $65,000 invoice scattered around her shoes, snapped out of her paralyzed state. The sight of her golden child writhing on the floor reignited her toxic maternal instincts. She found her opening a golden opportunity to shift the narrative away from her own federal crimes and paint me as the ultimate villain. Brenda threw herself onto her knees beside Madison, pulling her daughter's head into her lap. "Look what you are doing to your sister!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the foyer. She glared up at me, her face twisted with a mixture of feigned terror and malicious accusation. "You are murdering her, Paige. She is having a heart attack. Help her. Somebody help my baby." The sheer volume of Brenda's screaming caught the attention of the local deputies who had stepped out onto the front porch. The heavy wooden door swung open, and the taller deputy rushed back into the living room, his hand instinctively dropping to his radio. Seeing a woman convulsing on the floor, his training immediately took over. "Dispatch, I need EMS at this location immediately," the deputy barked into his shoulder mic. "Possible cardiac event or severe panic attack. Step back, ma'am, give her some air." I did not step back. I stood absolutely still, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the pathetic amateur theater production unfolding on my living room floor. Donovan, standing beside me with my son safely in his arms, raised a single skeptical eyebrow. Within 6 minutes, the wail of a local ambulance pierced the quiet atmosphere of the neighborhood. The flashing red and white lights painted the front windows as 2 paramedics rushed through the open door carrying heavy medical jump bags. "What do we have?" the lead paramedic asked, sliding to his knees beside Madison. She is going into cardiac arrest, Brenda wailed, clutching Madison's hand. My eldest daughter pushed her into a severe medical crisis. She is under extreme emotional distress because she was just violently evicted from her home. You have to save her. Madison played her part perfectly. She arched her back, letting out a weak, fluttery moan, her eyelids fluttering as if she were hovering on the very brink of consciousness. I stepped over the scattered legal documents and walked directly up to the paramedics. She is not having a heart attack. I stated, my voice calm, flat, and entirely devoid of sympathy. And she is not losing consciousness. She is simply backed into a financial corner, and this is her standard operational procedure. The lead paramedic paused, a blood pressure cuff half unrolled in his hands. He looked up at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. 3 years ago, when the bill for our father's funeral arrived, she pulled this exact same stunt. I continued, speaking loudly enough for the deputies and Brenda to hear every single word. She threw herself onto the carpet of the funeral director's office, clutching her throat and claiming she could not breathe. She hyperventilated until the director felt so incredibly sorry for her that he let her waive her half of the expenses. I paid the entire $20,000 bill out of my own pocket, while she miraculously recovered in the parking lot, just in time to make a bottomless brunch reservation. Madison's fluttering eyelids snapped open for a fraction of a second, glaring at me with pure venom before she quickly squeezed them shut again and let out another exaggerated groan. Check her vitals, I told the paramedic, gesturing toward my sister. I guarantee you she is perfectly fine. The paramedic narrowed his eyes. He strapped the blood pressure cuff around Madison's arm and slipped a pulse oximeter onto her index finger. He tapped a button on his portable monitor, waiting in absolute silence as the machine calibrated. The monitor beeped softly, projecting bright green digital numbers into the tense room. The paramedic looked at the screen, then looked down at Madison. His professional urgency completely evaporated, replaced by a hard, unamused glare. Her oxygen saturation is at 99%, the paramedic announced, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Her heart rate is a perfectly steady 72 beats per minute. Her blood pressure is 120/80. She has the vitals of a resting athlete. Brenda froze. Her wailing stopped instantly, her mouth hanging open as her ultimate distraction tactic crumbled into dust. The paramedic ripped the Velcro cuff off Madison's arm and snatched the monitor off her finger. He leaned over her, invading her personal space, completely fed up with being used as a pawn in a wealthy suburban family dispute. Ma'am, the paramedic said, his tone dripping with absolute authority. Faking a medical emergency to intentionally delay a lawful police order is a Class B misdemeanor in this state. If I have to load you onto my stretcher, you are going to the hospital in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. Madison's agonizing, life-threatening distress vanished into thin air. She sat bolt upright on the hardwood floor, her breathing instantly returning to normal. She aggressively smoothed down her wrinkled silk blouse, glaring at the paramedic as if he had deeply insulted her. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her designer purse off the floor, miraculously cured of her terminal stress. The taller deputy, who had been watching the entire exchange from the entryway, finally reached his absolute limit. He stepped into the center of the living room, resting his hand firmly on his utility belt. He had spent the last hour dealing with federal warrants, stolen firearms, and fake cardiac arrests. He was entirely done. This circus ends right now, the deputy barked, pointing a rigid finger directly at the front door. I am issuing a lawful order. You two have exactly 60 seconds to vacate this property. If you are still standing on this hardwood floor at minute 1, I am putting both of you in handcuffs for criminal trespassing and fraud. Move. Madison did not need to be told twice. Terrified by the reality of a jail cell, she practically sprinted toward the door, leaving her mother standing alone in the center of the wreckage. But Brenda did not move. She looked around the room, staring at the $65,000 invoice on the floor, the red folder of federal evidence on the island, and the back of her golden child retreating into the night. She had no husband. She had no retirement. She had no home. She had absolutely nothing left to her name. Her eyes slowly locked onto mine. The mask of the refined, wealthy matriarch completely melted away, leaving behind a feral-cornered predator. Logic had failed. Manipulation had failed. Guilt had failed. She had only one weapon left in her toxic arsenal. Brenda lunged forward, her hands curling into claws as she made one final desperate grab for power. "You will not do this to me," Brenda shrieked, slamming her hands down onto my quartz island and leaning over the counter. "I am your mother. You owe me your life. I co-signed the original loan on this house 10 years ago. Paige, you think you can just throw me out? I have squatter's rights. I have tenant rights. I will tie this property up in civil litigation for the next decade. I will drag you through the mud until you have nothing left." The taller deputy immediately stepped forward physically, inserting his large frame between Brenda and the quartz island. He rested his hand firmly on the metal handcuffs clipped to his tactical belt, his expression hardening into a mask of zero tolerance. 50 seconds, the deputy stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Squatters' rights do not apply when you are actively committing a crime on the premises. You are currently trespassing. If you do not walk out that front door right now, I will physically drag you out in irons." Brenda froze. She looked at the deputy's hand resting on his restraints, then looked at the red federal evidence folder still sitting on my counter. The reality of her situation finally penetrated her profound delusion. She could not tie my property up in civil litigation because she was entirely exposed to criminal prosecution. Her financial threats were useless. Her legal threats were completely hollow. She was trapped. But Brenda was a cornered predator, and when predators lose their primary weapons, they resort to the most vicious, desperate tactics available. Her face contorted into something truly grotesque. The mask of the refined, affluent matriarch peeled away, revealing the bitter, toxic core underneath. She slowly turned her head, looking down the long hallway that led to the nursery where my son was sleeping. If she could not destroy my bank account, she was determined to burn my character to the ground. "You think you are so perfect," Brenda spat, her voice dropping into a low, venomous sneer. "You stand there acting like you are completely untouchable. But you are nothing but a single mother playing house. Do not think for 1 second I do not know your dirty little secret about baby Leo." I did not flinch. I stood my ground, physically blocking her line of sight to the hallway. "I know exactly who the donor is," Brenda threatened, her voice rising to a hysterical, triumphant pitch. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, fully believing she had found my fatal weakness. "I will drag his name through the mud. I will call every single person back home. I will make sure the entire family, the entire neighborhood, and the entire country club knows exactly what kind of loose woman you really are. You will be a complete pariah. You will have absolutely no one left." I stared at her, feeling a cold wave of recognition wash over me. This was her ultimate weapon. This was her standard operating procedure. Brenda had always used reputation to control the narrative in our hometown. She weaponized gossip like a precision strike. When I was 19 and trying to move out, she spent weeks crying to the church prayer circle, claiming I was deeply troubled and rebellious. She whispered malicious lies to my aunts and uncles, systematically isolating me from the extended family before I even understood what was happening. She controlled the flow of information using manufactured scandal to elevate Madison and completely ostracize me. She honestly believed that threatening me with social ruin would force me to surrender. I looked at her flushed, triumphant face, and then I let out a slow, deeply satisfying sigh. "Go ahead, Brenda," I challenged her, my voice ringing with absolute chilling calm. "Make your phone calls. Call the country club. Call the family. Scream it from the rooftops. But you are going to look incredibly foolish." Brenda's finger wavered in the air. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching my face for any sign of panic. She found none. "The donor is a closed, anonymous medical file protected by federal HIPAA regulations," I stated, dismantling her threat with cold, hard logic. "You know absolutely nothing. You do not have a name, you do not have a face, and you do not have a story. You are making empty threats based on pure desperation." Brenda's jaw slackened. The triumphant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly. "And furthermore," I continued stepping closer to her and delivering the final crushing blow. Your petty hometown gossip has absolutely no power here in Seattle. We are 2,000 miles away from your toxic little social circle. My life, my business, my clients, and my friends are entirely beyond your reach. You cannot isolate me anymore, Brenda. You are completely irrelevant. The absolute truth of my words hit her like a physical strike. She stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Her ultimate trump card was a complete blank. She had no leverage left. Madison watched this entire exchange from her spot near the front door. Her wide, mascara-streaked eyes darted between me and our mother. The realization crashed over Madison with devastating clarity. Her mother had no power. Her mother had no money. Her mother could not manipulate the police, could not extort me, and could not save them from the street. The protective bubble of the golden child was officially destroyed. Madison's expression shifted. The panic and manufactured tears vanished, replaced instantly by a feral, unhinged rage. She realized that everything she had lost today, the money, the cars, the status, was the direct result of following Brenda's toxic playbook. Madison turned her head, locking her furious gaze onto her mother. "This is your fault," Madison screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated hatred. Brenda flinched, turning toward her favorite daughter in shock. "Madison, sweetie, calm down. We will figure this out." "You ruined my life," Madison shrieked, taking a menacing step toward Brenda. "If you had not constantly demanded a rich son-in-law, I never would have stayed with Malik. You pushed me into this. You told me to ignore the red flags. You told me the money was all that mattered. You made me a criminal." "I did it for your future," Brenda yelled back, her own temper flaring as her golden child turned against her. "You did it for yourself," Madison roared. Madison lunged forward. She grabbed a handful of Brenda's perfectly styled blonde hair, yanking her mother violently backward. Brenda shrieked in pain, her manicured hands flying up to claw wildly at Madison's face. The two women crashed against the entryway table, sending a decorative vase shattering into 100 pieces across the hardwood floor. It was a display of pure, ugly reality. The sophisticated facade was gone. They were tearing at each other's expensive clothes, screaming vicious, unforgivable insults, completely destroying the toxic alliance that had bound them together for decades. "That is enough," the deputy roared, drawing his baton and charging forward to physically pull the two violent women apart. Before the deputy could wedge his heavy armored frame between them, Brenda wrenched her head back, tearing her blonde extensions free from Madison's desperate grip. With a guttural scream of pure, unfiltered rage, Brenda swung her arm in a wide, vicious arc. Her open palm connected with Madison's cheek in a sharp, violent slap that cracked like a gunshot through the vaulted space of the foyer. Madison staggered backward, her hand flying to her rapidly reddening face. Her eyes widened in absolute shock, but the surprise lasted only a fraction of a second. The golden child, completely stripped of her pampered entitlement and facing total ruin, lunged forward with both hands out. She shoved her mother squarely in the chest with all her body weight. Brenda flew backward, her designer heels sliding uselessly against the polished oak floorboards. She collided violently with the tall marble pedestal standing near the front door. The heavy ceramic planter resting on top of it wobbled, tipped, and came crashing down, exploding into 1,000 jagged shards of terracotta and wet potting soil right over Brenda's legs. I stood silently behind the safety of the kitchen island, adjusting my sleeping son against my shoulder, and simply watched them. This was the ultimate poetic irony. I had spent my entire childhood being relentlessly policed by these two women. Brenda had subjected me to hours of grueling lectures on proper etiquette, poise, and public presentation. She had severely punished me for laughing too loudly at restaurants or wearing clothes she deemed insufficiently elegant. Madison had constantly scoffed at my career, calling my work attire cheap and my lifestyle unrefined. They had dedicated their entire existences to cultivating and fiercely protecting the illusion of perfect family optics. They demanded absolute compliance to maintain their flawless country club image, eagerly sweeping decades of profound emotional abuse under the rug to ensure the neighbors never suspected a single crack in their pristine foundation. And now here they were, Two women who claimed to be the absolute pinnacle of high society rolling around in wet potting soil, tearing at each other's expensive clothes, and brawling like desperate street thugs in my entryway. They had completely shed their dignity, finally exposing the ugly, hollow core that had always existed just beneath their expensive makeup. The taller deputy did not hesitate again. He holstered his baton, grabbed Brenda by the shoulder of her torn silk blouse, and forcefully yanked her to her feet. He spun her around with zero hesitation, pinning her face first against the wall. "Get your hands behind your back right now," the deputy commanded, his knee pressing firmly against the back of Brenda's legs to keep her immobilized. The second deputy moved just as swiftly. He grabbed Madison's wrists as she tried to claw her way back toward her mother. He twisted her arms behind her back with practiced mechanical efficiency, completely ignoring her high-pitched squeals of protest. "You are hurting me!" Madison shrieked, kicking her heels against the floorboards. "Let go of me, I am the victim here. She hit me first. You cannot arrest me. My husband is a—" She cut herself off, suddenly remembering that her husband was currently sitting in a federal transport vehicle facing decades in a penitentiary. "You are both under arrest," the lead deputy announced, his heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Brenda's wrists with a series of sharp metallic clicks. "You are being charged with domestic battery, criminal mischief, and destruction of property. You have the right to remain silent. Given how much talking you have done today, I highly suggest you start using it." Brenda thrashed against the wall, her cheek pressed hard into the drywall. "You cannot do this to me!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and frantic. "I know the mayor, I know the chief of police. I am Brenda Sterling. You have absolutely no right to put your hands on me. I will have your badge for this." "Ma'am, the chief of police does not care about you," the deputy replied coldly, pulling her back from the wall and forcing her to face the front door. "And right now, the only place you are going is the county holding cell." The second deputy clicked his cuffs around Madison's wrists, effectively neutralizing the golden child. Madison began to hyperventilate, actual genuine panic finally setting in as the cold steel bit into her skin. "Paige." Madison sobbed, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her cheeks. She looked at me, her eyes wide with desperate, unadulterated terror. "Paige, please tell them to stop. You cannot let them take me to jail. I have never been to jail. Please, I am your sister. You have to help me." I looked at her, my expression entirely stone-faced. "You made your choices, Madison. Now you get to experience the consequences." As the deputies began to physically march the two thrashing, weeping women toward the open front door, a sharp, upbeat ringtone cut through the chaos. Brenda's designer handbag, which had been knocked to the floor during the scuffle, was vibrating against the hardwood. The bright screen illuminated the dark foyer, flashing insistently. Donovan, who had remained perfectly composed and silently observant throughout the entire violent ordeal, stepped forward. He reached down and picked up the ringing phone, glancing at the caller ID flashing across the screen. He did not answer it, but he held the screen up so Brenda could see the name clearly as she was being hauled past him. Brenda's eyes locked onto the glowing text. Her thrashing ceased instantly. The remaining color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly hollow and suddenly very old. "That is your property management company," Donovan stated, his voice calm, surgical, and absolutely devastating. "I took the liberty of calling your landlord earlier this afternoon, Brenda. I informed them that a formal criminal package for identity theft and credit card fraud was being submitted to the district attorney's office today. I also forwarded their legal department a direct copy of the filing." Brenda stopped breathing, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. "As you are well aware," Donovan continued, adjusting his glasses calmly, "your luxury apartment complex has a very strict morality and criminal conduct clause built directly into the lease agreement. The management group does not tolerate active felony investigations on their property." Donovan tapped the volume button, silencing the ringing phone, and dropped it back into her open purse on the floor. "They are calling to inform you that your lease has been immediately terminated," Donovan finalized, dropping the ultimate crushing weight of reality onto her shoulders. "You have 72 hours to have someone remove your belongings, or they will be placed on the curb. You are officially evicted." The deputies did not give them a single second to process the devastating reality of their eviction. With their hands firmly cuffed behind their backs, Brenda and Madison were marched roughly through the shattered remains of the ceramic planter and out the front door. The cool, crisp night air rushed into the foyer, clearing out the suffocating tension that had choked my home for the past hour. The flashing red and blue lights of the two police cruisers parked in my driveway illuminated the wreckage of their carefully curated lives. Brenda, the self-proclaimed matriarch of high society, looked feral. Her expensive silk blouse was torn at the shoulder. Her blonde hair was tangled in a wild mess, and her face was smeared with dirt and mascara. Madison looked equally destroyed, her designer heels dragging against the concrete walkway as she stumbled forward in sheer panic. As the taller deputy opened the rear door of the cruiser and guided Brenda toward the hard plastic seat, she dug her heels into the pavement. She twisted her neck, locking her desperate, terrified eyes on me as I stood safely in the illuminated threshold of my home. The venom, the superiority, and the endless manipulation had completely vanished. All that remained was raw, pathetic panic. "Paige, wait," Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking loudly enough to echo down the quiet suburban street. She thrashed against the deputy's hold, refusing to get into the vehicle. "Please, you have to tell them to stop. Tell them this was just a massive misunderstanding. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot let your own mother go to a jail cell. Please, Paige." Hearing her mother beg, Madison broke down completely. She leaned against the side of the second police cruiser, weeping with loud, heaving gasps. "I will lose everything, Paige!" Madison shrieked, the reality of a criminal record finally piercing her golden child delusion. "My friends, my reputation, my entire life. You cannot do this to us. We are blood, we are family, you have to save us. You—" I stepped forward, crossing my arms over my chest as the cool wind brushed against my face. I looked at the two women who had tormented me for my entire existence. I looked at the mother who had always made me feel small, and the sister who had constantly mocked my choices. I remembered the years of isolation, the cruel whispers, and the endless campaigns to destroy my self-esteem. And as I looked at them crying in the driveway, I realized something profound. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no guilt, no pity, and no lingering attachment. "Blood just means we share genetic material," I stated, my voice ringing clear, flat, and devoid of any empathy. "Family protects each other. Family supports each other. Family does not show up in the middle of the night to extort money. You did not come here tonight to visit me. You came here with federal evidence, fake medical emergencies, and malicious lies to steal my home and take my son away from me." I paused, making sure they heard every single syllable of my next sentence. "You are not my family," I told them coldly. "You are nothing but strangers to me." Before Brenda could open her mouth to formulate another desperate, manipulative excuse, Donovan stepped out onto the porch beside me. He held a thick stack of legal documents securely attached to a rigid clipboard. He walked down the porch steps with absolute professional composure, approaching the deputies and nodding respectfully before turning his sharp attention to Brenda and Madison. "These are copies of the court-approved permanent restraining order," Donovan announced, his voice carrying the undeniable edge of a seasoned attorney. He held the documents up so the flashing police lights illuminated the bold signature of a Superior Court judge at the bottom of the page. "This is a permanent no-contact directive. As of this exact moment, you are legally forbidden from coming within 500 yards of Paige, her son Leo, her residence, or any of her associated properties." Donovan stepped closer to the cruisers. He tucked the thick packet of paperwork securely into the pocket of Brenda's torn blouse, then placed a duplicate copy in Madison's jacket pocket. "If you attempt to call her, text her, email her, or send third-party messages through your remaining country club friends, you will be in direct violation of this order." Donovan continued, his tone clinical and absolute. "And since you are both currently implicated in an active federal fraud investigation, violating this order will not result in a simple misdemeanor charge. It will result in an immediate transfer to federal lockup without the possibility of bail. Do you understand?" Brenda stared down at the paperwork protruding from her pocket. The fight completely drained out of her. She was a broken, bankrupt woman with no home, no allies, and a looming federal indictment. She had played her final card and lost everything. She slumped forward in total defeat, allowing the deputy to push her head down and guide her into the back of the cruiser. Madison followed suit, sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy car doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside the cages they had built for themselves. The deputies gave Donovan and me a final respectful nod before sliding into the front seats of their vehicles. The powerful engines roared to life, breaking the stillness of the night. I stood on the porch with Donovan, watching the taillights of the police cruisers fade down the long, winding road of my neighborhood, taking the last remnants of my toxic past away with them. A profound, unfamiliar silence settled over the property. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the crushing weight of 3 decades of manipulation finally lift off my shoulders. I was safe. My home was secure. My son was sleeping peacefully down the hall. I turned to head back inside, fully believing the nightmare was finally over. But as my hand grasped the front door handle, a sudden glint of light caught my eye. I paused, turning my head back toward the street. Parked at the very end of the cul-de-sac, half hidden in the deep shadows of the large, ancient oak trees, an unfamiliar black sedan was idling quietly. The headlights were turned off, but the faint bluish glow of a dashboard screen illuminated the distinct silhouette of a driver staring directly at my house. The police cruisers were long gone, but the strange car remained absolutely motionless in the dark, watching my every move. I felt a sudden icy chill run down my spine as Donovan stepped up beside me, his eyes locking onto the exact same vehicle. The drama was not entirely over yet. The black sedan idling at the end of the cul-de-sac finally shifted into gear. Its bright LED headlights flared to life, cutting through the darkness and temporarily blinding Donovan and me as the vehicle slowly rolled forward. It did not just pass by. The heavy polished Mercedes glided directly into my driveway, the tires crunching softly against the concrete, pulling up right to the exact spot where the police cruisers had been parked just moments ago. The driver's side door swung open and a wave of heavy, suffocating floral perfume immediately assaulted the crisp night air. Aunt Beatrice stepped out into the driveway. She smoothed down her impeccably tailored cashmere coat and adjusted the massive diamond rings on her fingers. Beatrice was my mother's older sister, and in many ways, she was the upgraded, fully funded version of Brenda. While my mother operated on manipulation and manufactured guilt, Beatrice operated on cold, hard cash. She was the ultimate family enabler, the deep pockets who had continuously bankrolled Brenda's toxic lifestyle for the past decade, buying her way out of consequences and paying off anyone who dared to question their pristine family image. Beatrice reached into the back seat of her luxury sedan and pulled out a massive, ostentatious gift box wrapped in silver paper and tied with a ridiculously large silk ribbon. She slammed the car door shut and marched up my front walkway with the absolute unquestionable entitlement of a woman who fully expected the world to bow at her feet. "I saw the flashing lights from the end of the street," Beatrice announced loudly as she reached the bottom of my porch steps. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask what had happened. She simply looked at me with an expression of profound, exhausted disappointment. I waited for the local theater production to conclude before making my entrance. You always did have a flair for the dramatic page. I stood on the top step, physically blocking the pathway to my front door. Donovan remained silent at my side, his posture rigid and alert. "Whatever little argument you just had with your mother, it ends right now," Beatrice lectured, ascending the first 2 steps. She held out the silver box like it was a royal decree. "I brought you a housewarming gift. I am exhausted from my flight. I am staying in your guest room for the week, and tomorrow morning you are going to march down to that police station, drop whatever ridiculous petty charges you filed, and apologize to your mother and sister." She attempted to step past me. I did not move a single inch. "Excuse me." Beatrice snapped, her polite facade cracking instantly. "Move aside, Paige. I am coming inside." "You are absolutely not stepping foot inside my home," I replied, my voice ringing with total, unshakable calm. Beatrice froze, her heavily made-up eyes narrowing into furious slits. "Do not speak to me with that tone. I am your aunt. I am your elder. I flew all the way out here to fix this mess because Brenda called me crying this morning about your terrible attitude. You need to learn some basic respect. You need to forgive and forget whatever trivial slight you are holding on to. Family is family, and you do not treat your mother like a common criminal. I looked at her, staring directly through her expensive veneer. This was the woman who had paid for Madison's luxury wedding while I was working double shifts to pay off my student loans. This was the woman who had silenced my aunts and uncles every time they expressed concern over Brenda's erratic behavior. Beatrice did not care about family harmony. She cared about control, and she used her checkbook to maintain the illusion of a flawless bloodline. Forgive and forget, I repeated slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of her demand hang in the cold air. Blood just means we share DNA, Beatrice. Family protects each other. Family supports each other. The two women who were just dragged out of here in handcuffs came into my house to steal my property and threaten to take my son. They are not my family. They are nothing but strangers to me. Beatrice scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I were a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. Oh, please, Beatrice sneered, adjusting her grip on the silver gift box. Stop exaggerating. Brenda and Madison are probably sitting in the lobby of the police station right now waiting for you to come to your senses. They are not criminals, Paige. This is just a massive overreaction. I tilted my head, offering her a smile entirely devoid of warmth. They are not in the lobby, Beatrice, I stated, delivering the facts with surgical precision. They are currently being processed into the county jail. Madison is being booked for domestic battery, criminal mischief, and destruction of property because she physically attacked her own mother in my foyer. Brenda is being booked for those exact same charges alongside a federal indictment for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Beatrice's mouth dropped open. The heavy silver gift box slipped slightly in her hands. Federal lockup is not a timeout, I continued, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet neighborhood. They are facing years in a penitentiary. And thanks to the permanent restraining order Donovan just served them, if they ever come within 500 yards of me, my son, or my property again, they will be arrested on sight. You cannot buy them out of this one. Beatrice stumbled backward, her designer heels scraping awkwardly against the concrete steps. The utter shock on her face was quickly replaced by a dark, vicious fury. The realization that her money could not fix this, that her power was useless here in Seattle, sent her into an immediate aggressive panic. You vindictive, ungrateful little wretch! Beatrice spat, her voice trembling with pure malice. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. If you do not drop these charges right now, I will ruin you. I will call every single person back home. I will contact the country club, the church, the entire extended family. I will paint you as a psychotic, unhinged monster who locked up her own mother out of sheer jealousy. By the time I am done with you, your reputation will be entirely destroyed. You will not be able to show your face in our hometown ever again. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her and allowed a genuine, icy smile to spread across my face. Before you make those phone calls, Beatrice, I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial whisper, you might want to take a very close look at your own taxes. Beatrice let out a sharp, breathless scoff. She threw her head back, her manicured hand flying to the base of her throat as if I had just uttered something incredibly vulgar. For a split second, she attempted to maintain her arrogant, superior posture, relying on the decades of unchecked authority she had wielded over our entire extended family. My taxes! Beatrice repeated, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. Are you out of your mind? I have the best accounting firm in the state on my payroll. My finances are impeccable. Do not think you can stand on this porch and throw baseless, pathetic bluffs at me, Paige. I am not Brenda. You cannot intimidate me with empty threats. I will bury you in defamation lawsuits before you even wake up tomorrow morning. She took an aggressive step forward, her expensive cashmere coat catching the breeze. She fully expected me to back down. She expected the ingrained childhood fear of her wealth and power to force me into submission. Instead, I took a step down to meet her, closing the distance until I could smell the sharp, overpowering scent of her designer perfume. I am not bluffing, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping into a register so cold and factual that it caused her to freeze in her tracks. And I am not relying on empty threats. I am relying on hard, undeniable, highly illegal data. Beatrice's eyes darted to Donovan, who stood silently on the porch above us, his arms crossed, watching her with the detached curiosity of a predator observing cornered prey. When Donovan and I began building the case against Malik to secure Madison's eviction, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. We did not just look at my sister's bank accounts. We hired an independent team of forensic accountants to trace every single dollar Malik had touched over the past 5 years. We needed to know exactly where his stolen funds were going, how they were being washed, and who was helping him hide them from the federal government. Beatrice's jaw tightened. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor began in her left hand, but she gripped the large silver gift box tighter to hide it. We expected to find offshore accounts. I continued pacing slowly across the concrete step. We expected to find dummy corporations and crypto wallets. What we did not expect to find was a direct, heavily encrypted pipeline leading straight into the primary operating accounts of the Beatrice Sterling Foundation for Underprivileged Youth. The color instantly drained from Beatrice's face. The haughty, furious indignation that had fueled her entire arrival evaporated, replaced by a sudden suffocating terror. "You see," I said, leaning in closer, "the accountants found a very fascinating pattern. Every time Malik needed to clean a large sum of illicit cash, your prestigious charity miraculously received an anonymous, untraceable donation. And within 48 hours of those donations clearing, your foundation would suddenly incur massive, unverified administrative expenses, inflated catering bills for charity galas that never happened, outrageous consulting fees paid to shell companies that just so happened to be registered under your maiden name in the Cayman Islands. You are lying," Beatrice whispered, her voice completely devoid of its former strength. She looked around the dark, empty street as if searching for an escape route. "You do not know what you are talking about. I know that you have been using a registered nonprofit organization as a personal money laundering machine." I countered my words, hitting her like physical blows. "I know that you used Malik's dirty money to fund your luxury cars, your European vacations, and every single one of Brenda's toxic bailouts. You bankrolled my mother's abuse for years using stolen, untaxed federal funds. You are not a philanthropist, Beatrice. You are a federal criminal." Donovan descended the porch steps, his heavy shoes sounding loudly against the concrete. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and produced a small, silver metallic flash drive. He held it out, letting it catch the ambient light from the street lamp before placing it firmly into the palm of my hand. I held the flash drive up, dangling it right in front of Beatrice's pale, trembling face. "This drive contains the complete, unredacted financial ledgers of your charity for the past 7 years," I stated, watching her eyes track the small piece of metal as if it were a loaded weapon. "It contains every wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every hidden account routing number. It is a neatly packaged, fully verified roadmap directly to your front door." Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy wheeze came out. Her knees actually buckled slightly, forcing her to shift her weight to stay upright. "I am going to hand you this drive," I told her, pressing the cold metal into her shaking palm. "And then you are going to get back into your luxury sedan, and you are going to drive straight back to the airport. You are going to return to our hometown, and you are going to pretend that I simply ceased to exist." I stepped back, claiming my space and establishing the final, unbreakable boundary between my new life and the toxic wasteland of my past. "If I ever hear that my name has crossed your lips," I warned her, my voice echoing with absolute finality, "if you breathe a single word of gossip about me at your country club, if you dare to send any of your flying monkeys, no aunts, no uncles, no cousins, to harass me, call me, or guilt trip me, if you or anyone you control comes within 500 yards of me, my son, or my property, I will not call the local police." I pointed directly at the flash drive in her hand. "I will hit send on an email containing every single file on that drive, and I will forward it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. I promised. They will freeze your assets, seize your properties, and you will spend the rest of your natural life sharing a cell block with Brenda and Madison, Do we have a crystal clear understanding? Beatrice looked down at the flash drive in her hand. Her face was perfectly ghost white, stripped of all arrogance, all entitlement, and all power. She was entirely broken. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could no longer maintain her grip on the oversized silver housewarming gift. The massive box slipped from her fingers and crashed heavily onto the concrete driveway. The impact tore the silver paper open, and a surprisingly cheap bottom-shelf bottle of red wine shattered violently against the pavement. The dark red liquid bled across the concrete, pooling around her expensive designer shoes. Beatrice did not look down at the mess. She did not attempt to pick it up. She did not utter a single word of defense or denial. She turned on her heel, stumbling awkwardly over the shattered glass, and scrambled back toward her idling vehicle. She threw the driver's side door open, practically falling into the leather seat, and slammed the door shut behind her. The engine roared as she threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching loudly against the asphalt. Donovan and I stood on the porch watching in absolute silence as the luxury sedan spun around in the cul-de-sac and sped away into the night, disappearing completely from my life. The red taillights of Beatrice's sedan vanished into the dark, leaving nothing but the quiet hum of the suburban night. Donovan turned to me, adjusting his glasses with his signature unruffled calm. He offered a firm nod, confirming that the legal perimeter was entirely secure before turning and heading to his own vehicle. I stepped backward into my house and pushed the heavy oak door shut. The deadbolt engaged with a loud, definitive click. The second the lock slid into place, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright for the past 3 hours evaporated entirely. My shoulders dropped. A deep physical exhaustion settled into my bones, making my knees feel heavy and my hands tremble slightly. I leaned my back against the solid wood of the door, taking in a long, shuddering breath. I was not crying. There was no sadness left in my body to draw from. There was only the absolute, undeniable reality of survival. I opened my eyes and looked at the entryway. The foyer looked like a war zone. Wet potting soil was ground deep into the custom floorboards. Jagged shards of terracotta from the shattered ceramic planter were scattered across the entry rug. A few stray threads of expensive silk from Brenda's ruined blouse clung to the sharp edge of the marble pedestal. But what caught my attention the most were the harsh black scuff marks marring the polished oak. I could clearly trace the overlapping streaks of chaos. There were the frantic, desperate heel marks from Madison, fighting the deputies, overlapping with the heavy, dark rubber streaks from where Malik had been forcefully taken down and pinned to the floor earlier that evening. Staring at those black marks, a visceral memory from my childhood hit me with stunning clarity. Growing up, our house had been a museum of suppressed violence and perfectly staged optics. Whenever Brenda flew into one of her narcissistic rages, things got broken. Crystal vases were swept under imported Persian rugs. Smashed dinner plates were hurriedly replaced before the country club guests arrived for evening cocktails. As a child, my entire existence revolved around tiptoeing through the wreckage. I spent years quietly cleaning up the messes Brenda and Madison created, terrified that if I left a single shard of glass on the floor, I would be punished for their destructive behavior. I looked at the mud and the scuff marks staining my beautiful home. Back then, I was a helpless child scrubbing floors to keep the peace. Tonight, I was a homeowner who had just orchestrated the legal and financial dismantling of my abusers. I had the power now. I did not have to clean up their mess ever again. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a premium home service application. I bypassed the standard cleaning options and booked a specialized deep sanitation crew for the first available slot at 6 in the morning. I explicitly requested that they bring industrial solvents to scrub the foyer. I wanted every microscopic trace of Brenda Madison and Malik permanently eradicated from my physical space. I wanted the floor sanitized. With the cleaning scheduled, I walked purposefully to the central security hub mounted on the hallway wall. I punched in my master override code and completely wiped the system's memory. I deleted the old passcodes, erased the temporary access keys, and typed in a brand new, highly encrypted sequence. I pulled up the security network on my phone and activated the perimeter alarms, syncing the outdoor floodlights and the motion sensors directly to my personal device. I glanced at the live video feed from the nursery camera. Leo was sound asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The chaos of the night had not touched him. He was completely safe. I had successfully defended our fortress. I had reclaimed my space, my peace, and my life. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of cold water, and sat heavily on the stool at the kitchen island. I relished the absolute silence of my home. A sudden vibration against the granite countertop broke the quiet. My phone illuminated, displaying Donovan's name across the screen. I answered immediately, knowing my attorney never called this late, unless a major development had occurred. "I apologize for the late hour, Paige," Donovan said, his voice thrumming with an uncharacteristic edge of excitement. "But I just got off the phone with the lead federal agent handling Malik's indictment. I knew you would want to hear this before you went to sleep." "Tell me," I instructed, taking a sip of water. "When the FBI raided Malik's office and seized his hidden servers earlier today, they cracked his primary encryption faster than anticipated," Donovan explained. "They finally hit the bottom of his money laundering sinkhole. Malik was not just funneling small amounts to Beatrice's fake charity. He had set up a massive offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands to hide the bulk of the assets he hijacked from your business." I sat up straighter, my grip tightening around the glass. "Because you provided the forensic audit that served as the foundational evidence for the federal raid," Donovan continued, delivering the ultimate victory. "The district attorney is classifying you as the primary victim of his corporate embezzlement. They have already frozen the offshore accounts. The federal prosecutors are fast-tracking your victim compensation package." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second as the magnitude of his words settled in. "They are not just recovering your stolen business assets, Paige." Donovan finalized, his tone echoing with sheer triumph. "They are liquidating Malik's fraudulent holdings to pay you direct damages. There is a massive sum of federal restitution money headed directly into your accounts. You are about to walk away from this exponentially wealthier than when you started." Exactly 1 week later, I sat in the plush leather chair across from Donovan, inside his sprawling downtown office. The panoramic windows offered a pristine view of the Seattle skyline, but my entire focus was locked on the thick, heavily tabbed manila folder resting on the polished mahogany desk between us. Donovan opened the folder with the surgical precision I had come to expect from him. He slid a single crisp sheet of paper toward me. It was the finalized federal restitution summary. I stared at the bold black numbers printed at the bottom of the page, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the digits. "The federal authorities completely liquidated Malik's offshore holdings," Donovan explained, his voice projecting absolute satisfaction. "Because we provided the unredacted evidence that initiated the raid, the district attorney prioritized your victim compensation package. Every single dollar Malik siphoned from your business has been recovered. Furthermore, the court seized his personal assets to pay you direct punitive damages." I ran my index finger over the staggering total. The amount sitting in my newly secured accounts was not just a full recovery. It was exactly triple the amount of money Brenda and Madison had extorted, manipulated, and outright stolen from me throughout my entire youth and early adulthood. Every stolen birthday check, every forced loan I had to take out to cover Brenda's fabricated emergencies, every dollar I had sacrificed to maintain their pristine country club illusion had been returned to me with heavy interest. Donovan reached into his suit jacket, produced a sleek silver pen, and placed it gently on top of the restitution document. He then slid 3 more packets of paper across the desk. "These are the final victim impact affidavits against your mother and sister," Donovan stated, his tone shifting back to strict legal formality. "Your signature on these pages will finalize the district attorney's plea agreement." I picked up the heavy silver pen. As I stared at the lines requiring my signature, I waited for the inevitable wave of familial guilt to wash over me. I waited for that familiar, suffocating voice in my head to tell me I was being too harsh, that I owed them loyalty simply because we shared blood. The guilt never arrived. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, undeniable clarity. As the tip of the pen met the textured paper, my mind flashed back to a rare, quiet afternoon I had spent with my father shortly before he passed away. We had been sitting in the garage away from Brenda's screaming demands. He had tapped his temple with a grease-stained finger and looked at me with profound seriousness. Always keep your own ledger page, he had warned me. People will constantly try to rewrite your history to suit their narrative, but numbers never lie. You make sure your books are always balanced. I pressed the pen down and signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes. I signed the first affidavit. I signed the second. I signed the third. I slid the papers back across the desk to Donovan. The books were finally balanced. The district attorney did not offer them leniency. Donovan informed me meticulously, gathering the signed documents and securing them in his briefcase. Faced with the mountain of federal evidence we handed over and completely cut off from Aunt Beatrice's bankroll, Brenda and Madison had absolutely no choice but to accept a brutal plea deal to avoid spending a decade in federal prison. Donovan leaned back in his chair, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. They officially pled guilty to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and domestic battery. He continued delivering the ultimate local payoff. They avoided a penitentiary cell, but the judge showed zero mercy. They were sentenced to 5 years of strict, heavily monitored federal probation and mandated to complete 2,000 hours of grueling physical community service. Furthermore, they are facing absolute unmitigated financial ruin. I listened intently, absorbing every single word. The state seized everything they owned to pay off their mounting legal debts and federal fines, Donovan finalized. They have no assets, no credit, and no wealthy enablers left to bail them out. In order to meet their court-ordered payment schedules and keep a roof over their heads, the two women who claim to be the pinnacle of high society are now forced to work full-time minimum-wage jobs. The poetic justice was absolute. Brenda, who had severely punished me for wearing clothes she deemed insufficiently elegant, was now wearing a polyester uniform and serving greasy fast food to the very neighbors she used to look down upon. Madison, who had constantly scoffed at my career and called my lifestyle unrefined, was now scrubbing industrial floors on the night shift just to afford basic groceries. They were trapped in the exact life they had always mocked. I thanked Donovan for his relentless work, shook his hand, and walked out of the high-rise building into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. The air felt lighter. The city looked more vibrant. Several days later, I was standing in my freshly sanitized foyer, enjoying the peaceful quiet of my secure home. Leo was playing happily in the living room, completely untouched by the chaos that had been permanently eradicated from our lives. I walked outside to the front gate, opening my reinforced mailbox to gather the afternoon delivery. Mixed in with the standard utility bills and grocery circulars was a cheap, thin envelope. I pulled it out and stared at the return address printed in the top left corner. It bore the official insignia of the county holding facility. The handwriting scrawled across the front was frantic, messy, and immediately recognizable. It was from Madison. I stood on the walkway holding the flimsy piece of paper. I knew exactly what was inside. It would be a pathetic, rambling letter filled with manufactured tears, desperate begging, and a fresh wave of toxic manipulation. It would be a desperate attempt to throw out one last hook, hoping to catch the naive, accommodating sister she used to control. I did not feel a single flicker of curiosity. I did not care what she had to say. I walked back inside my home, locking the heavy oak door firmly behind me. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight into my home office. I pressed the power button on the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting next to my desk. The machine hummed to life with a low mechanical growl. Without opening the envelope, without pausing for a single second of hesitation, I fed the letter directly into the metal teeth. I watched as the blades grabbed the cheap paper, ripping the frantic handwriting into 100 tiny, meaningless shreds. The sound of the machine destroying the final piece of their toxic legacy was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I turned off the shredder, walked back into the living room to my son, and finally began the rest of my life. The mechanical growl of the shredder faded into silence, leaving the house completely still. I walked out of the home office and made my way down the hallway. The thick, dark hardwood floors were solid and unyielding beneath my feet. I opened the door to the nursery and stepped inside. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of a small nightlight. The faint, soothing scent of lavender and baby lotion hung in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of the air purifier. I walked over to the crib, carefully scooped Leo into my arms, and sat down in the custom-built velvet rocking chair by the window. I rocked him slowly. He let out a soft, contented sigh, his tiny hand curling into the fabric of my shirt. I closed my eyes and listened to the absolute tranquility of the house. There was no screaming echoing through the drywall. There was no sound of shattering glass from the kitchen. There was no frantic, suffocating panic about maxed-out credit cards, unpaid utility bills, or impending foreclosures. My childhood had been a terrifying minefield of emotional explosions, a daily exercise in surviving Brenda's narcissistic rages and Madison's vicious entitlement. I had spent the first 2 decades of my life absorbing their toxicity, brainwashed into believing that enduring their abuse was simply the mandatory price of having a family. Looking down at my sleeping son, a profound and unshakable realization washed over me. Cutting Brenda, Madison, Malik, and Beatrice out of my life was not merely an act of self-preservation. It was the most fundamental, fierce act of maternal love I could ever perform. I was the shield. I had absorbed the final desperate blows of that generational curse so that Leo would never have to feel them. He would never know what it was like to be a pawn in a twisted family game. He would never be manipulated for money, shamed for simply existing, or forced to clean up the wreckage of other people's failures. The toxic rot ended permanently with me. 6 months later, the quiet sanctuary of my home was filled with an entirely different kind of noise. It was the rich, vibrant sound of genuine laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. The sprawling dining room, which Brenda had once tried to claim as her own personal staging ground to impress people who did not care about her, was now radiating incredible warmth and authentic connection. I carried a large roasted garlic and herb chicken out of the chef's kitchen and placed it in the center of the massive oak dining table. My guests immediately cheered the sound filling the high-ceilinged room. There were no country club socialites here. There were no fake aunts or calculating cousins waiting for an opportunity to tear me down behind my back. Sitting around my table was the family I had actively chosen. Donovan sat at the head of the table on the right. For the first time since I had met him, he had discarded his tailored suit jacket and loosened his silk tie. He was laughing genuinely at a joke told by Sarah, my lead marketing director, and the brilliant woman who had helped me keep my business afloat during Malik's initial sabotage. Next to her sat my college roommate Chloe and her husband, who had driven 3 hours just to be here. These were the people who had offered their unwavering support when I had absolutely nothing to give them in return. They were the ones who stood by me during the darkest hours of the legal battle without demanding a pound of flesh. We passed around heavy ceramic bowls of roasted root vegetables and poured generous glasses of a rich vintage Cabernet. The conversation flowed effortlessly from business victories to travel plans to funny stories from our past. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was keeping score of who paid for what. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, agonizingly tense dinners I had been forced to endure at Beatrice's estate, where every bite of expensive food came with a side of vicious, calculated judgment. Toward the end of the meal, Donovan tapped his silver fork against his wineglass. The room quieted down, turning their attention to the brilliant attorney who had become one of my most trusted and loyal friends. "I would like to propose a toast," Donovan said, standing up and raising his glass toward me. "To Paige. I have spent my entire professional career watching people crumble under the overwhelming weight of betrayal and greed. I have seen families destroy each other for pennies, but I have never seen anyone take the broken pieces of their life and build an absolute fortress out of them. You fought the hardest, most grueling battle imaginable, and you won on your own terms. To your beautiful new home, your new life, and the unstoppable future ahead of you." "To Paige!" The table echoed in perfect unison, raising their glasses high in the warm lighting of the dining room. I smiled a deep, unwavering expression of pure joy and clinked my glass against theirs. I took a slow, savoring sip of the dark red wine, letting the rich flavor ground me in the present moment. As the table resumed their lively conversation, I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The high-definition baby monitor application opened immediately. Leo was fast asleep in his crib, perfectly secure in a house that I owned free and clear. His future was permanently insulated. The massive federal restitution funds were already locked into heavily protected high-yield trusts bearing his name. He would have access to the best education, the safest environments, and a life completely devoid of the financial terror that had plagued my youth. Brenda was currently working a drive-through window in a grease-stained uniform, forced to smile at customers to survive. Madison was scrubbing industrial floors on the night shift just to afford basic groceries. Malik was sitting in a cramped federal penitentiary cell. Beatrice was living in a state of constant paranoid terror under the watchful eye of the IRS. I did not pity a single one of them. There was no lingering guilt in my heart. There was no toxic forgiveness required. I locked my phone, sets it face down on the polished oak table, and picked up my wine glass. I looked around the room at my true family, my beautiful home, and the peaceful life I had viciously fought to build. The books were perfectly balanced. The war was over. I had won. The story of Paige teaches us that true family is forged through mutual respect and care, not merely bloodlines. For decades, Paige endured emotional and financial abuse from Brenda and Madison, conditioned to believe that enduring their toxicity was simply the mandatory price of familial loyalty. However, her ultimate victory wasn't just the massive financial restitution or witnessing their legal downfall. It was the profound realization that walking away was an act of fierce maternal love for her son Leo. Setting unbreakable boundaries is essential for protecting your peace. Never let unwarranted guilt tether you to abusers masquerading as family. Share your own journey of overcoming toxic relationships and establishing healthy boundaries in the comments below.